I'm Sarah Hartley. I'm Professor of Technology Governance in the Department of Management in the Business School. I'm also Director of the Centre for Responsible Innovation. I'm Co-Director of the CDT on Environmental Intelligence. And I can see a few people from that centre here today. So I've been working in the space of AI and environment, which includes machine learning for Earth observation, for about 7 years now since we started the CDT. And I'm a social scientist in the interdisciplinary space. But the AI for environment as a space has been growing really rapidly over the last 5 years. And what I'm seeing, and these are 3 examples here, is a kind of narrowing of interdisciplinarity, where we're seeing predominantly data and computer scientists and environmental scientists, but the social scientists largely absent from those papers, discussions, meetings, etc. And that's happening through research funding, but also even here at the university. Present conference is an exception to that. So my work as a social scientist, and I have worked with a number of postdocs and PhD students, tries to disrupt that narrowing and bring social science into this space. We do that really for 3 reasons. One is social science can increase the efficacy of AI in this space. It can address or identify and address the ethical and governance challenges around AI in this space. And I'm using AI broadly here. But it also can increase the range of voices that shape the way that technology develops. So we call that technology trajectories. The way that AI is developed, we know this in other sectors, if it's a narrow range of voices shaping it, we can get quite problematic outcomes. So we're interested in increasing those voices. So I have lots of projects I could explain, but in 5 minutes it's not possible. So I'm going to use an article to show you what I mean. This is an article that was in the news at the BBC a few weeks ago, and it's Could AI Text Alerts Help Save Snow Leopards from Extinction? The article goes on to tell us that snow leopards are becoming extinct. There's very few still exist in the world, and this is predominantly to human-animal conflicts because snow leopards are in conflict with villagers who, by killing their livestock. So that's the tension with livestock. So this AI, a group of scientists were developing it in collaboration with the World Wildlife Fund in Pakistan to develop these cameras that could send a text message to the villagers when a snow leopard was close, and they could bring their livestock in and protect them. What could possibly go wrong? What do you think social science could contribute to this? Looks like a great story, right? Well, the story goes on with a few anecdotal quotes and comments from communities. The first one is, my phone barely gets any service during the day. How can a text help? This is a very sceptical community member who said, well, there are practical challenges to this. Then there was this quiet protest. Wires were being cut, blankets were being thrown over the cameras. This sort of silent protest was very disruptive to the way the technology was being applied. And then you have this cultural context where cameras had to be moved because women are walking by. And so they had to adjust this to this cultural context as well. And then there were concerns raised that local farmers were giving poachers access to the text messages. So when a text came in to alert villagers to move their animals, they forwarded that on to the poachers. So actually that was increasing potential extinction of the snow leopard. And then finally, one farmer was questioning the benefits of the animals, and this is about the whole purpose of the technology itself. There was a lack of support in some areas for the whole purpose of its being. So in my 5 minutes, I just want you to take away from this story that social science needs to be involved upstream. It can help provide the context that's needed. It can help do the social aspect of this work that would enable this technology potentially to work, maybe in this space, maybe in a different context, but it can help develop that technology, bring these voices in early on as the technology is being made. And that technology involves, as you know, lots of decisions. And one of the things we do is look at those decisions in the development process and try and understand which of those decisions could be opened up to more voices, whether those are other disciplinary voices, or whether those are community voices. And so I think my time is up, and I will leave that. The rest of the colleagues will hopefully give you more detail of some of their some other examples of how social science works in this space.
So I'm Ledingham. I'm a senior lecturer in responsible and transformative innovation at the Business School. And in my snapshot talk, I'm going to provide a brief window onto kind of some of the key issues and questions and topics of interest that really emerge at the intersection of responsible innovation and machine learning. So responsible innovation can be very broadly introduced as an area of social scientific inquiry that's primarily concerned about doing two things. So the first is delimiting harm and the potential for unintended consequences associated with new technologies and innovation. And secondly, as well as avoiding harm, it really seeks to think about how we can actually align science, technology and innovation with societal values, and it really seeks to do this in participatory ways. So what's interesting about responsible innovation is that parts of it have become increasingly institutionalised. So the European Commission was a key proponent of responsible innovation, and the OECD, UKRI for example, if you're submitting a funding application, there's this increasing expectation that there would be some level of reflection about the kind of responsible innovation dynamics of the project in hand. So there are both substantive and normative rationales for doing responsible innovation in practice. So substantively, we know that if we draw on diverse expertise, we often generate innovations that are more robust and effective in practice. And on a normative basis, we also know that many of the innovations that are emerging today can exert really profound impacts on both people and planet, impacts that are often greater than the laws of the land. So there's a real kind of democratic imperative as well to ensure that we are developing innovation in responsible ways. So at the core of responsible innovation is this real commitment to what's referred to as epistemic diversity. So drawing on diverse knowledges in the design, development and deployment phases of emergent innovations. So for example, with machine learning for Earth observation, drawing on diverse knowledge can help us to think about what might be spatial, temporal and other biases that are associated with particular data sets be, who and how is data being labelled. So for example, with Earth observation imagery, what about the kind of cultural and spiritual significance of land that a focus on physical attributes might miss? And this is relevant not just to kind of Earth observation, kind of satellite imagery, but also to environmental intelligence more broadly. So there's an image up on the screen here of Black Americans, particularly in the southeast of the USA, being underserved by the National Radar Network. And the implication of this is that if non-representative training data is being unreflexively fed into models, and those models are then feeding into decision-making and practical applications on the ground, that really has the potential to reproduce kind of problematic distributional injustices. So responsible innovation says that by drawing on diverse expertise, we can anticipate some of these harms and actually kind of work some of them out at the upstream phase of development. And social science expertise as kind of part of that as well is able to articulate phenomena such as technology hype and the kind of institutional pressures at play as well. So for example, in Seattle, we saw the rapid and problematic deployment of an AI system for earthquake prediction, which contributed to trust. So kind of social science theories and kind of well-articulated concepts can help anticipate some of these harms in the upstream phase before they then take place. But we don't just draw on diverse knowledge to anticipate harm. As I mentioned previously, it's also to align science, technology and innovation with societal values as well. And this comes back to the kind of normative rationale for doing responsible innovation. So for example, with AI flood risk models, these can exert very tangible implications on for insurance and development purposes. So the question then becomes, by drawing diverse stakeholders and publics together, under what kind of conditions do we want to see these tools and techniques being deployed? What's of particular interest to responsible innovation is the question of how we draw diverse knowledge together, particularly given the knowledge asymmetries and opacity issues that are prevalent within the space of AI and machine learning. And there's some really incredible work that's taking place to think about the tools, techniques and processes that can actually facilitate this in robust ways. Very quickly, responsible innovation, it is concerned with a number of things. It's also interested in the political quality of some of these innovations. So, for example, if we look at Microsoft's AI for Earth and other initiatives, there are some really kind of pressing questions about who and what is benefiting. So we've seen some climate for AI initiatives that have actually been repurposed for policing purposes and also have been used as a platform for furthering commercial and corporate sectors which have questionable ethical qualities associated with them as well. And then finally, we're particularly interested in, at a time where there are gaps in governance, the role of researchers, kind of institutions and organisations, and actually influencing public goods and engaging in norm setting. And we can see some really interesting work taking place at the moment, looking at some of the hidden risks of AI and how to kind of share mutual learning about that in terms of, particularly thinking in terms of communities of practice. So in sum, there's a hugely diverse role for the social sciences, beyond narrow notions of the social sciences kind of feeding into public acceptance or data governance, particularly at a time where we're seeing actually kind of gaps emerging between the AI and social sciences. Hopefully this has given a bit of a kind of imaginary onto some of the areas and topics of concern that responsible innovation scholars and practitioners are interested in.
Hi, hello everyone. My name is Ernesto, and there you should read, I co-lead a research agenda. Why? Because the whole purpose of this presentation is to tell you that artificial intelligence in the wild is for us to renounce control. It's less about sovereignty, control, governance, and less, a lot more less about our ideas of top-down imposition. It doesn't matter if it's the state or indigenous communities. The whole idea of these 5 minutes is that AI in the wild is about not starting with some premises, but trying to engage with ethnographic social science to develop our AI stuff. So I'm going to show, research projects I'm doing with Steve and Ellie, right? We just got a NERD grant, and I'm going to be talking about the research I do with some of my PhD students in the CDT that started like 7 years ago. Thanks, Sarah and the other social scientists for inviting me. I wouldn't be doing that without that invitation. So there are 3 things that we're doing in the research group. One is glaciers and water quality, and we are co-leading that with Ellie, who is here. We have another one that is about Mexico City. I'm Mexican, so I'm obsessed with Mexico City. It's one of the oldest, biggest, and most interesting cities in the world. I mean, not because I'm Mexican, but you should take a look. And then with Manju, we are doing heat architectures in Nepal. So we're doing field work in Nepal to think about heat and then use natural language processing to understand it, rather than the other way around. So I think that the first problem with AI is that we know too much. We already have problems that are well defined, and I think that's the wrong way around these issues. And for us to do things that might be a little bit more creative is a little bit more of radical ignorance. That's why I'm talking about the wild thing. So as I said, all projects are actually co-lead. And what I mean co-lead, I'm not in control, even though I'm the PhD supervisor. Lots of these fields are not my fields of expertise. So you're going to see here, okay, it didn't work, but imagine this video is a little bit of a film. So what we're doing is we're trying to bring visual anthropology, visual ethnography in conversation with artificial intelligence, but also ethnographic fieldwork. So what we do is we travel in Nepal for a couple of months. We do ethnographic fieldwork, interviews, observations, and then we develop a natural language processing method that is attuned to those interviews. It's not the other way around. It's not to complement artificial intelligence, right? Artificial intelligence is a conversation with this ethnographic fieldwork. And that's our main issue here with Manju. Hopefully we're going to be publishing our first paper. It has taken us years, literally years of fieldwork analyzing to publish this first paper. The second one is right here. Steve is the PI of this NERD grant. We went together to do fieldwork for 3 weeks in Chile, going with Ellie, and then we developed this idea of citizen-led glaciology. Again, the idea of artificial intelligence in the wild is that we are not in control. We do the ethnographic fieldwork, we interview people, and then we think about how science can speak to justice, okay? Now I'm going to be going for 64 days to Chile to do a documentary that is a conversation, an extension of that work we're doing together. And I think this is really relevant because this is where AI and machine learning can actually service and open up questions of environmental justice in concrete ways. And finally, the one that I'm going to be talking about is in Mexico City, and this is with Tom Holger Gatsby. And what we're doing is going to Mexico City, doing a little bit of commutes with Mexican city dwellers that have to spend around 2 hours in average to get to their jobs. And what we're thinking is how injustice is being reproduced. So here we're using natural language processing to think about the colonial history of Mexico, right? So instead of looking at mass media Twitter, we're looking at the historical texts that have shaped Mexico City to find moments of kind of colonial restructuring of the city. And this has been quite challenging, but also super satisfying. We can start seeing those patterns of racial exclusion and colonial legacies. And I mean, I try to do this in 90 seconds per project, so I think I'm just in time. Yeah? 1 minute, oh great. So this is the last slide, okay? This is a collaboration I'm doing with some artists to work about algorithms. This is our representation of an algorithm, right? That chef over there that is taking the binary code out of herself and then doing the recipe. I mean, an algorithm is a sort of a recipe, right? So the whole message of this presentation is that technological sovereignty is not the solution when it comes to problems, when it comes to governance, but it's actually the source of everything that is wrong in terms of what we think about artificial intelligence. And I've seen this conclusion coming over and over again when I read papers. Let's have more technological sovereignty. What does that mean? Sovereignty for whom? It should be the state, should be these people that we are trying to kind of convince the mining companies not to destroy glaciers. Okay, so the whole point of artificial intelligence in the wild is to kind of go against our ideas of what good governance and democracy is, and even our methods. And that is kind of like the invitation of these AI in the wild. There's actually a book, I just found out that there's a book that is called AI in the Wild that is about sustainability and carbon consumption, but this is a different wild artificial intelligence with ethnography. And with that idea, technological sovereignty is actually bad. That's my contribution to these 5 minutes, which, yes, I'm very glad I managed that. Thanks a lot.
Hi, my name's Emily Robinson and I'm a PhD candidate here at Exeter. One of the things I'm interested in is the sustainability of technologies and particularly around AI as we increasingly use it to look at environmental problems. So we often think of AI as being a solution to our environmental and climate problems, but we need another frame. I think this is a frame that social scientists can really bring in, and that frame needs to ask what the cost is and who is bearing the brunt of that cost. So to begin with, to situate it within Earth observation data, I've got some statistics here from Karen Anderson and her colleagues' papers. That in 2023, there was over 1,100 Earth observation satellites in orbit, and this is growing every year. With more satellites, we have more data. In that same year, there was about 800 petabytes of Earth observation data being stored, and that's growing by around 100 petabytes every year. So again, these are all stats from the paper. This equates to about 4,100 tons of carbon, and that's the equivalent of flying 41,000 individual flights from London to Paris. And of course, it's not just Earth observation data, and what we're not doing is just storing it. We're running models at data centers, and it's all of the increasing use of AI. So in 2023, AI accounted for about 3% of global emissions, and that's equivalent to the aviation industry. And what we find is that these big tech companies are very good at abstracting away from the idea of the infrastructure. So we often hear about it talking about the cloud. And the cloud gives it a sense of it being very immaterial, but it's not. Building these data centers has very much planetary costs to them because they are data centers. So due to the demand of increasing amount of data centers, we're likely to see a 2% increase in demand for copper just coming from data centers and 11% in an increase in demand for gallium. This is all the mining implications that comes with it. That's a whole nother bunch of environmental implications along the supply chain of just getting to build these data centers. That's not including running them or them being operational. For an operational data center, on average, they use about 300,000 gallons of water a day. And currently we have just under 12,000 operational data centers globally. And these costs are largely hidden from the user. They're not things you're aware about when you're processing requests when you're using ChatGPT. And the other thing that's hidden from the user is where your request is sent to. So with most AI that you're using, particularly ChatGPT, you don't choose where your request is sent to. It's done on a combination of different things. So for example, your request could get sent to a data center in Iceland. This is powered 100% by renewables, and it often uses free air cooling due to the low ambient temperatures in Iceland. Comparatively, your request might get sent to a data center in Virginia. Here, the grids are still heavily reliant on fossil fuels, and they have a large concentration of hyperscale data centers. Now, the difference in emissions will be by 50 times difference from it getting sent to Iceland or Virginia. And as a user, you don't get to control that. So for context, in 2023, Microsoft said that 43% of their data centers were in high water-stressed areas. And the location not only matters for emissions, but it also matters because it embeds itself in local energy politics where these data centers are built. It embeds itself in the climate realities for the communities that live around these data centers and the social inequalities that grow from this. And this is where we really see that it is not just a technical challenge. This is a challenge of governance and justice as well. And we need to not just be asking what AI can do for the planet, but also what it demands from the planet. That's it.
Thank you. So I've got a bit of a daunting task here because I'm the last one of this panel, and so I've got to make sure I don't flop after 4 very, very engaging talks from my colleagues. So I'm Niccolo Tempini. I'm a social scientist in the Sociology, Philosophy and Anthropology Political Science department. And but actually, I work a lot on social studies of data science and AI. Most of my teaching has always been actually for the for the Department of Computer Science, where I teach basically social science for data scientists. I do a lot of work and research related to AI governance, also a bit practice-oriented on AI governance. And so I thought maybe that's something I could contribute, was a little bit of a table of contents of the key ideas that the people jostle about when they talk about the AI governance from a practical point of view. I was thinking this morning, I work on social studies of health research, data science and AI in health. I've had limited interactions with this community here, but I'm aware of many kinds of interesting cases that one could ask about the governance of Earth observation and climate change science, besides those that directly affect maybe specific locales and settings, but also I'm aware of, for instance, colleagues that have worked on scandals such as the Climate Gate and what resulted in terms of how people govern benchmarking models for this kind of research. So there's lots of different angles that one can take, and that is why AI governance is difficult, because there are lots of different issues to think about. And in that sense, it really resembles a little bit like research ethics. If you are a researcher, you've gone through research ethics approvals probably, and you probably know that on the other side there are humans who have limited understanding of the problems you're trying to solve and the problems that you might face or encounter. So nothing about AI governance in practice is a perfect exact science, and it is all about procedural outcomes first, and procedural fairness and ethics and best practices first, and then outcomes second. So some of key ideas. One is because I imagine lots of people here are related to this kind of research, and obviously research can take very different kinds of practical instantiations. Some of you work in large distributed efforts and projects that involve lots of institutions. Others instead maybe they work alone, so it applies variably. But one key ingredient in this table of content of the AI governance would be to realize that to do good data science and good AI, it takes obviously an approach to ethics that some people have called, like Abeba Birhane, who's a computer scientist from UCD, relational. In short, as my colleagues have also said, you have to engage with people who have who own issues. Part of the knowledge that you need to be able to gather and mobilize in order to do science the best way you can is to make sure that you have the right kind of expertise mix. So good set of domain experts and good set of experiential experts, because the experiential experts, that other people could call vulnerable communities, local groups, minorities, and so on, always have got a different angle to your problem, different ways to input on what actually really matters. Then you need to think about what you can do in terms of organizational design. Scientific work is, of course, work. It's a type of work, and so there are lots of things that you can do in order to get it done well. There are methods to work well, just with the way you write your scripts. There are good methods to check your code, and there are good methods also to check that you are checking for ethical issues and governance issues that you might encounter. It's not like, you know, a bit of an intuitive art. In that sense, then you can do a lot to think about what is the interplay between formal and informal elements. I'll give you an example. For instance, traditionally in universities, you talk about research ethics as something that goes through the research ethics committee. You have an application, it gets reviewed. If you get accepted, then good job. But actually, there's lots of, that is a formal element. There's lots of things also that you can do in terms of informal, and some things are formal about being informal. So for instance, meetings in which you have no particular method, but actually a very, very defined commitment to actually get it right. Then you can think about frameworks to cooperate with others and how you take each other's into account. Ultimately, you want to develop a culture of distributed ownership where people are actually vigilant, and there are many levels in the organization of your work in which you are thinking about how you're going to tackle the issues that you encounter. And also there's a lot you can do, all of you here, including those who work alone, in terms of demanding posture towards the wider institutional ecology. In a report that we released with the Other Lovelace Institute and lots of partners, including here in Exeter, the East Side, we emphasize how a lot of best practices can be fostered by the ecology of journals, funding bodies, professional societies asking more. You know, if you submit to new RIPS, for instance, you're increasingly now asked for lots of panels to release a statement of broad social impact. So there's lots of things that you can actually demand also as a researcher participating in these wider ecologies in terms of raising the game. Just as an example, quick, I'm the lead on all the social science aspects of a large AI hub funded by the EPSRC, one of the AI hubs, and this one is about causal AI applied to healthcare. And in terms of then putting all these insights into one package, we are talking about the way we can put together a governance framework that is anticipatory. And this has got, again, a bit of an interplay of formal and informal elements. It's got a structured way to engage with the wider ecosystem and try to be accountable to them, and also ways to do best practices inside the hub. Yesterday we had a meeting of the Research Integration Board where some of my computer science colleagues said, I find this really, really useful. It reminds me a little bit of therapy. Because we're talking about how to do our science best, including methodologically, but in a different way, in the narrow technical way that we would do normally. There's a lot you can do if once you're armed with this as a social scientist, also to change the discussion. For instance, what we're trying to do, this is 8th of July, here in Exeter, is take the debate that is developing in maths and stats applied to health, around notions of targeted validation, basically how to make sure that algorithms survive translation after you've trained and validated them in a particular hospital of trust, and you take them somewhere else and the performance drops. So people talk about targeted validation, and we say, okay, let's talk about it. If you wanted to make it sustainable and scalable, you have to think about lots of other things that make it targeted. So for instance, policy, organizational procedures, expertise mix, and all of that. So target validation shouldn't be a quantitative method, should be a quantitative and qualitative method, and the whole package will determine its success. So just as an example. So, thank you.
Fantastic. So this session's actually in two parts. Don't think I explained that terribly well. We had the 5 flash talks at the beginning, and now we've got a little bit of time for discussion with our speakers for questions arising. And I'm sorry we didn't get this lined up in advance. We've got a bunch of chairs here. if you'd like to come and fetch it. Which is very exciting in academia to get a personal chair.
Yes. I hope that is a sign of good things to come. I'll take the last one, no worries. You're keeping the doors open. No worries.
Oh, and apologies we weren't able to get that lined up in advance, but we can work magic behind the scenes. So, does anybody have a question or something that's been prompted or sparked by what you've just seen and encountered?
Shall I just shout?
Yes.
It was really interesting hearing about framing the understanding the potential risks of doing something. I guess the immediate thought I had was, how do we balance that against the potential risks of inaction? So if you take, if you take an example like using AI to diagnose cancer, there's loads of ethical risks, of course, with working with personal data and that kind of thing, but also there's a cost, to not diagnosing cancer. So I don't know if you've got any thoughts about how we balance that tension?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I think it's definitely not about not using AI. I wasn't here to talk earlier, but I heard from many people that I think Bree spoke about it earlier as well, of when we look at accuracy and improving models, we need to look at what's the gain of keep running things to improve by 0.1%, for example, a model. There's things like that. One of the really big things for me moving away from just how we balance it is we need to also be demanding transparency from the companies that have power over the data centers and the models, where our data is being stored. OpenAI, as an example, I know it's not Earth observation, but a lot of people are using ChatGPT. There's some fantastic researchers looking at the numbers and doing the research to look at, how much electricity is used, how much water is used per request. We shouldn't have to be doing that research. OpenAI and other companies, they have that research available. We should be demanding transparency. And I think before we can answer the questions of how we balance where we use it and how much we use it, that should be our first point of call. We need to have the transparency of that information first. But I certainly don't think it's about not using AI, like you said. And in the environmental sciences included, there's some great applications of AI. I think it's just first having transparency over how we're using it. Perhaps as researchers, it should become more normalised to have something at the start of your paper, like a data statement of how many emissions you think were roughly produced during the processing, et cetera, if we can find out the data centres where it's run, things like that, just to start moving forward with that kind of transparency.
If anybody else wants to briefly add one more bit, this is just in case to save voices, so you don't have to project everything.
Yeah. I was just thinking that also maybe it's not just in terms of costs, right? I'm thinking about orphan diseases, right? Probably the population that might be affected by this is little in comparison to the wider population. So the ethical concerns is not just to think about cost benefits and risk that we can quantify, because that also gets us into another framework in which we are sidestepping the other bits. So of course you would say inaction here is actually the best way forward, because this small section of the population is going to be benefited. I should put my money somewhere else. So that issue also goes to minorities. But I think that's an excellent question. What is the cost of inaction? I think...
Can I just add, so across emerging technologies more broadly, this is a really common question, right? Is that, and maybe it's the way we frame ourselves as critical social scientists. So when we mean critical social scientists, we're not standing in the lab like telling you off, right? What we mean by critical is like just scratching the surface, right? It's about asking questions which may not be obvious in a disciplinary context within which we work, right? And we're all disciplines have the same kind of challenge there. And so we're not imagining social science as a stage gate where we're going, right, okay, we have to stop the project. The point of integrating social science upstream in these processes is to look at the process of developing it as lots of different decisions all the way along. It's not one decision. We don't make the technology and then say, oh, now we have to decide whether to use it or not. As you know, there are lots of decisions involved. So what we try to do is open up those decisions and bring more information to be able to make those decisions in ways that are going to make the technology technology more effective.
Thank you.
Can I add something quickly?
No, sorry. We want to hear lots of questions, so we might just have a couple of responses to each question. Taps, and then Hal will come to you next.
Thanks. Probably a comment or a question that's directed to Sarah. I liked what you said about trying to conserve those snow leopards from getting extinct. I realize where I come from in Zimbabwe. We're losing rhinos due to poachers. And I don't know, have you ever thought of how best, like in a park, in a remote park, how best can we use AI to conserve those species? Like we're losing rhinos, we're losing pangolins to poachers. How best can we use the social science and AI to conserve the little we have?
So first of all, this was a news article that was not, so it's not a research project that I do, but it's a great example of where you can see these questions, obviously. But the other thing is, so certainly in my research, the ethical issues, so the question you're asking, I don't have an answer to, and many social scientists don't. What we do have is a set of methods that are about process that can help find the answer to that question. So we have a set of methods we can talk to, bring in different kinds of expertise. We have methods to engage with communities. We have a whole suite of methods where we can kind of bring that knowledge that you need to be able to answer that question.
Okay, it's a bit of a provocation because as I try to demonstrate anyway, I'm very, very keen to practically contribute to AI projects, but one of the key questions is always, to start with, is not to assume that AI could be a good method for solving any problem. So I think the first invitation would be to reformulate the question is not so much how best we can use AI to save rhinos in a park, but it's rather, what is the best method to save rhinos in the park, because that is ultimately the outcome. And so being able also to give up, and if you have to work on AI because that's the only problem, that's the only method you know, then it's better to change problem if you can't change the method. So one is obviously to ask these uncomfortable questions. The other is to follow up on this, and also the previous question is basically how to think about how you create a institutional practice and memory as to the questions you've asked that allows you then to explain the choices you've made, precisely because it leads to these different choices and not to, we've developed these fantastic machine, we just discovered that it burns the planet in the meantime because you had probably thought about it before.
That's brilliant, and you've, without having observed it, you've managed to replicate a conversation that's been going on in parallel in the breakout spaces around one of the downsides of an ML-focused event is we don't spend a lot of time talking about non-ML approaches to understanding problems, framing problems, the questions we're asking, or even the tooling that we're using. So you've stopped, like, you're mirroring things that have been happening in the social conversations and breakout space, which is fantastic. How?
So there are lots of new technologies, and there always have been, right? There's a whole raft of things being created on different scales. Is AI different? Is it just another technology, or is there something about it that you think needs extra scrutiny? And if so, why? Is it about who's making it, who owns it, scale?
Yeah, so I guess it kind of it depends on who you ask. I think it's been argued that the kind of epistemic concerns associated with AI kind of present a distinct series of challenges. So it's often said that there's AI is accompanied by expert opacity, so these huge knowledge asymmetries between kind of researchers in different disciplines and also between developers of these models and kind of lay publics. But also there's true opacity as well. So obviously, thinking about the challenges when you have kind of models that are using kind of billions of data points of actually being able to kind of discern how a particular output has been generated. So from a responsible innovation perspective, there's a strong sense that that presents a distinct challenge for this emerging area. But then also at the same time, if you look at some of the kind of industry and the kind of political ecologies and relationships that are at play, some would argue that there's a kind of amplification and intensification of some issues that we've seen in the past with other technologies. But yeah, I think it's really clear that it's an area where there's a real need for kind of interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary collaboration to kind of prevent kind of siloed thinking and actually really steer kind of AI towards kind of the needs of people and planet where it's appropriate to do so.
I just want to say that all technologies come from the Greek techne, that means revelation. And each of them reveal different things about the world. So the short answer is every technology is unique. It poses a unique challenge. And depending on how you deploy it, you can argue that it's a different technology, right? A knife is not the same in my hand as in the hand of someone that is trained to fight, right? So the way you conceptualize what is a technology does matter. So, but one of the unique things about AI is that actually it reaps off data across the world, right? It challenges our notions of property. It goes against the ideas we have about governance, right? And you think about big data and DNA, for instance, which for me is like all the debates we have now in AI we had 20 years ago with genomics. It challenges our notion of who owns DNA, because at the same time that it's my data, it's also data of my family and the data of the population. And all those challenges are still there and they're still sticky. So in that way, it's not the data debates are not unique, but the scale and the way in which it brings data all across the world, that is something I've never seen before.
Can I follow up on? Sorry,
Yeah,
you want?
no, you go.
Yeah, or you? Okay. Yes, so just to follow up from Ernesto indeed, what makes the cost-benefit analysis of any AI-related project so complicated, and is something that we've talked about a lot in debates around how to do ethics review and ethic projection of risks for AI, is that of course being digital is so modular, easily redeployable, and so it can be integrated in lots of different kinds of ways. Lots of AI technologies are dual use, which obviously lots of people get uncomfortable when a technology crosses the threshold into military and back. But most importantly, because essentially all of this makes then the long-term impacts of the technology so much more difficult to predict. And while other technologies such as genomics already had this kind of profile, the fact that genomics had such an enormous barriers to entry made it obviously a lot less likely that these kind of things would happen. So, I can train a facial recognition algorithm on ImageNet, images of faces of people scraped from the web. Traditional research ethics would look into that and say, well, nobody's getting harmed, right, because the pictures were already on the internet and so whatever. But actually, obviously, if the data set is biased and ethnic minorities are undersampled, facial recognition algorithms underperform and not in evenly distributed ways. Therefore, anything that you do in facial recognition, civilian or military, based on this data set, will be harmful and ethically problematic, and you don't really control it. So then the big question is, how do you govern this again? And I'll just give a provocation, okay? Because when you get into the regulatory type of discussions and forums, besides that, there's that very, very misleading claim of the technology companies that say, "Please regulate us. Our LLMs are really dangerous. Please, please, please regulate us." And it is a very, very misleading attitude that they have, because regulators don't regulate easily or happily AI precisely because you have in the regulation always to thread the line between supporting the right kind of innovation that you welcome and governing the kind of uses that you don't want to welcome. And in a technology that has such long-term downstream chains of impacts, it's particularly difficult. So nobody is actually saying in regulation that we will ever get to the point where we regulate the hell out of things through prohibitions and checks on everything. Nobody thinks it is practically possible, and that's why nobody has gone to say, well, let's just do ethical checks the hell out of LLMs. The point is then that I've been in conversations with people who are in regulatory panels, and they say, we want people who develop algorithms to develop ways to be accountable without us to have to put formal rules down as to what is allowed and what is not allowed. The regulation has always been actually a toolkit that has got many things. One is the formal law, what you can do and what you can't do. A lot more is about how you're demonstrating that you're thinking carefully, that you're actually having the best process to get it right, because that is, from a regulator's point of view, often is pretty good.
Thank you.
That's one of the
Sorry,
other-
Sarah, I want to open back up again.
I'll come back.
I'm reading a lot in the press about differing and changing attitudes to free speech. Is that something which you think about as social sciences in this social scientists in this context?
Not me.
You mean does it limit us in what we can say? Is
Are
that
you
what mean?
observing that people's expectations in the wider world around what people can and should say are stable? Is the consensus? Is the world changing around us? Are we keeping up?
So I don't know if I feel it personally, but it's definitely something we observe. So Sarah and I have been working on a paper around technology, basically as a technology emerges into society, the communication styles that develop alongside it. And one of the things we have observed is there's an increasing sort of tendency towards like cancel culture behaviours of technologies now as well. So not just people or brands or celebrities, but a really dismissive approach to technologies within discourse and discussion, which I think has a range of different problems, particularly because it decides who gets to have a voice and who doesn't. And the cancel culture tends to be that we've observed around technology less about, for example, if previously a celebrity has said something or a brand has done something and they're being held socially accountable for what they've said, it seems to be less about that, and it seems to be less about closing conversations, regardless of it being morally right or wrong, but just based on whether that technology is accepted. And so cancel culture actually derives from black culture on Twitter, of holding spaces accountable for where there was other obstacles for them having their voices heard. And actually what we're sort of observing in the public space is actually the opposite is happening with cancel culture around technologies. We're still getting a mainstream narrative, but it means any other minority group is not having their voice heard around technologies at all, which is very problematic and challenging. So I'd say I've less observed it for how I feel about what I'm speaking about, but it's definitely something I'm observing in the public space around technologies.
Sorry, Sarah.
Maybe, this is me. The AI in the wild stuff is against the idea of regulation and state-sponsored and sovereignty. So I think we need to be a lot less worried about freedom of speech, if it comes from the right, the left, and a little bit more worried about what we do, right? Like, we know that most people are against what's going on in Gaza, but no one can do anything about that. It's not about the representation of our voices, right? So in a way, I think that our liberal imaginations need to be geared less about how our voices are represented in the public sphere, and a little bit more about how the governance structures make that happen, make this representation paradigm work. So lots of the things that we are researching about glaciers, for instance, there's a lot of people complaining and saying you should not destroy glaciers, and glaciers are destroyed anyway. Mining companies get their way. So maybe I think, for me, the question is not so much about freedom of speech, but how much what we say and the values we say we hold dear affect the political world. Yeah, so I think the trap for us is to think less about what we say and start thinking a lot more about what our institutions actually do. Because the liberal trap is like, no, I'm represented, who cares? Everyone knows that they're against the war and the war's still going on. So that's my very anarchist take on the whole liberal idea.
Thank you. Sarah, do you want to add anything? Okay. I'd like to open back up again, because it's really important. We build this as hearing from this community and an opportunity for them to pose questions. Jess.
I'm hearing a lot about governance and regulation, and it reminds me that we have like environmental law to enforce those things. But are you, as social scientists, do you have much intersection with environmental law for that enforcement? And do you see maybe as social scientists you could be the bridge between a more physical research space on the environment and how that affects humans and how we can enforce that through law as well?
We just finished a paper that is called Magical Legalism, right? And this is exactly the idea that through law, we're going to be able to solve these environmental problems. And it's magical legalism because if you think about the volume of cases that legal structures need to process, if I'm a mining company, I love legal processes. It's going to take me 30 years, right, to kind of like bring the evidence. In those 30 years, I can make $1 trillion. And I know I'm going to lose a process at the end, and I can give you your $20 million. I'm happy to give you that. I can actually put that in my accounting books. So that's what I'm talking about when we say we need to challenge this liberal imagination. By design, what I think is that the legal structure is designed to fail. Because of the time, the volume of cases, the evidence you need to challenge one of these things, and the resources, right? One of the things we were talking, and I hope we can publish that paper soon, is that a mining company has millions of dollars just to produce the research that's going to get you into court. So I think it's a losing battle to begin with.
Can I come back on that? Right, so you said that freedom of speech doesn't matter because it doesn't translate to action. That's kind of like undermining democracy, right? The idea that we have a voice and we use it. And then you're saying the law is basically ineffective and isn't going to change anything either. What's left?
So if I don't think that democracy, what I think is like your formal shallow democracy that is based on I say something and then action follows is naive, and the whole social imagination that is built around that needs to be challenged for more substantive democracy, right? Democracy meaning like demos, people, and doing things, not just talking about that. I mean, if you read all the manuals about how to kind of like crush social movements, is to let them speak, right? I go there and I say, are you sure you want to take that action? Are you respecting the freedom of speech of your neighbor? Right? So if you read the way they train the CIA and all the secret services, it's exactly that. And it's because they know the liberal imagination is going to entrap you into thinking, no, they haven't heard my point. Right? So the problem is not that I don't believe in democracy, it's that we have created these shallow mechanisms to make it look like democracy while we cannot challenge the real problems. And a little bit of my challenge is like, well, the way we produce law is not that the law is doomed, but it's reproducing this paradigm. The same way in which freedom of speech allows us to say something that is inconsequential for eternity. So that's kind of my challenge. It's not like, oh, democracy is crap. It's more like we need to do something better.
Well, I was just going to, if I can add anything after Ernesto's comment, but it comes back to the point around, I think what makes AI different to some of the other emerging technologies is power, and the closeness between power of the big tech companies and governments. And the US epitomizes that at the moment. And it feels a long way sometimes from where we sit in the university, but it isn't. It very much shapes the work that we do and how we do it. And I think creating laws takes a long time, and there are very powerful interests shaping these processes. And we are not designing, the democratic process is heavily weighted in favor of that political power. And that, I think, is different to how, certainly was very different to the genomics revolution and to other technological revolutions beforehand. So I think that's something that we really do need to think about quite critically in this AI space.
I think that's a really interesting point around the control and the power of all these different institutions. One of the benefits I see of AI is that building those models is quite computationally expensive and uses massive amounts of resources, but once you've built it, using it is very cheap. And so one of the benefits of that is you can take something that is currently very computationally expensive and only a few people can run, such as global weather models to do forecasting, and you could package them up and put them into a browser, like a ChatGPT, or you can make them accessible to people that would never be able to access those resources, run those models, be able to apply that form of analysis in their local region to better understand their part of the world. So in many ways I feel like AI has an opportunity to aid in the democratization of using those computational methods that wouldn't have had otherwise. I've said that and I've realized it's not really a question.
So I think this is around the questions around AI democracy, right? I think there are lots of examples where AI can help create healthy democracy. It can also have the opposite effect. So we see facial recognition technology in Middle Eastern countries that are restricting democracy. So I think again, it's not the technology itself, but it's the application of the technology which matters. And that's where we need to open up discussion, debate around how technology is used. And that's no different whether it's facial recognition in Iran or whether it's AI in machine learning for Earth observation. So we want to ask those questions and reflect on the application.
Yeah. I think a lot of what you're getting directly from what Sarah was saying, that when people talk about democratization through technology, it's always a double-edged sword. And so we've got to be, Martin Heidegger, the famous philosopher, used to talk about, in the question concerning technology, about the inversion between means and ends, when the means become an end, and that is a feature and a risk and harm of a technologically intensive society. And a lot of these conversations become an example of that, but also with the example of how to use AI to protect rhinos. We have to question what is the end and what is the means there. Therefore, the end that you're probably hoping is that what is getting democratized is climate-informed decision-making, right? Local distributed, empowered, informed decisions related to these kind of issues. The method is not the problem, right? And so that is often, the means becomes the short for the end, but ultimately we've got to pay attention that we get to the end. Yeah. There's Chumbo there as well. Who's trying?
Can I just say something?
Sorry, I didn't want to. But she wants
Sorry,
Chumbo, I've had my back to you the whole time, so if your hand's been up and waving, I haven't seen.
Yeah. She wants to.
Sorry, I just wanted to add two small things to that as well. So I think as well we need to. I do think things like large language models and ChatGPT are also changing some of that landscape. So I know within the next year, the request of users using it is actually going to surpass the energy use of training it. So that won't be true of all models moving forward as well. And I think that's where things like these large language models are changing the landscape, because even OpenAI, I don't think, anticipated how many people were going to use it and how many people were going to be sending requests every day. So that is also changing. It won't just be the model training now that has a huge implication. But I also think, sort of touching on the AI democratization, but also the question that Hal asked earlier, is I think AI isn't just a technology in itself, it's many different technologies. If you look at large language models, for example, the output's becoming much closer to social and cultural artifacts than other AI models. And I think that changes the way when we talk about democratization, but we see ChatGPT as having like this global proliferation of people using it because these outputs are closer to social and cultural artifacts, but it's a real compression of knowledge down to a hegemonic form of knowledge. Like, it's not, at best, even in their own papers, OpenAI talk about culture as being as simple as something, just language of translation. So I think there's also, these other problems that come from these, that we can't address just as an umbrella term of AI. We also need to individually inspect them as different technologies.
And I think we'll take a final question from Chumbo.
Thank you. There's so much pressure on me. I think we are talking about a very complicated, complex concept. Just imagine how to define AI. Is a kind of random forest model, or it is large language model, or geo foundation model. So it's so complex. We need a community with experts from almost every aspect to work together and to create this like a more healthy growth in the field. It needs a lot of talent and a lot of collaboration. Just one, there is a joke coming from, I think, the head of the education ministry in US. She was referring to AI. She always called A1 because I looks like a 1. So apparently, that's a good example that we need to have good education rather than to diminish the education. So the concept here is, can we work together and try to create an even better community?
I think so. I mean, I guess this is building community, right? I'm not completely sure about education because that goes close to the deficit model. This idea that with education, we are not lacking education, right? And we are still not facing the challenges of injustice. So I think, again, it's part of this idea of like education is going to solve the problem. We can work together and we know what are the things we need to work on and still not do that. But I think building community and a community that brings expertise together like what we're doing here and the CDTs and all these conversations started actually because we started a community that was transdisciplinary. I would not be working on glaciers and all this stuff without that community. So yeah, I think the community is there. Maybe I disagree a little bit with the education idea, like it's going to save us, but at least political action might have a chance there.
I agree with you. And again, it's a little bit maybe to synthesize both of you and to bring it to a convergence is again the idea of not so much focusing on achieving an ideal outcome, on the chances of achieving an ideal outcome, but at least of governing the process such that you are trying to really question what is the best outcome that you can actually achieve out of a wide range, and so you can't guarantee the utopian outcome, but at least you can take seriously what you're doing, and you need that when you were talking about the community. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. I'm not as provocative as Ernesto, much as I might aspire to be. But maybe one suggestion is I hope people might take away from this session an ambition to have a reflective conversation with someone from a different disciplinary perspective on the projects that you're involved in, and just see what that might open, what it might lead to. But taking that step of saying, you know what, in the next month or so, in the next 6 weeks, I'm going to try and find someone, connect with someone who's coming at this from a really different perspective and just see what they think of the work I'm doing, might be a really fantastic step. And over lunch, perhaps that might be one of our wonderful speakers here. So if everybody could join me again in thanking them.